In the sprawling, gritty tapestry of northwest England's underworld, a world painted in shades of gray and governed by its own brutal code, reputation is the only currency that matters. It is earned through fear, maintained by violence, and can be extinguished in a single, deafening gunshot. For decades, few men possessed a more formidable reputation than John Kinsella. To the outside world, he was just a name in scattered news reports, but on the streets of Liverpool, he was an institution. Known universally as Scouse John, he was a living embodiment of the city's tough, resilient, and often dangerous spirit. A former heavyweight boxer and a decorated martial artist, his physical presence alone was a deterrent. Standing 6'2" and built like a man carved from granite, he carried an aura of controlled violence that few dared to test. But Kinsella was far more than just muscle. He possessed a sharp, strategic mind that elevated him from a common street enforcer to one of the most respected and feared fixers in the country. If a high-stakes drug deal went sour, if a territorial dispute threatened to erupt into open warfare, or if a high-profile figure needed a problem to disappear, Kinsella was the man to call. He navigated the treacherous currents of the criminal landscape with an unnerving calm, mediating between old-school gangsters who lived by a fading code of honor and a new, more volatile generation of criminals. His legend was crystallized in 2008. Steven Gerrard, the revered captain of Liverpool FC and a city icon, found himself the target of a campaign of terror by a notorious gangster named George Bromley Jr. When Bromley's intimidation escalated, Gerrard's family, desperate and seeing no other recourse, reached out to the one man whose influence could trump Bromley's menace. They reached out to John Kinsella. As Kinsella himself would later coolly recount in a courtroom, he took measures. The specifics were left unsaid, shrouded in the ambiguity that was his stock in trade. But the result was immediate and absolute. The threats against Gerrard stopped. The incident catapulted Kinsella's name from the shadows into the headlines. It solidified his status as a man who operated at the highest echelons of the underworld, a man whose word alone was a weapon. But with this notoriety came a terrible price. He was no longer just a respected figure, he was a symbol of power, and in the world he inhabited, symbols are made to be torn down. A target was now firmly painted on his back. While Kinsella's influence radiated from Liverpool, a cancer was metastasizing in the heart of neighboring Salford. A once monolithic criminal syndicate known simply as the A-Team had ruptured, splintering into two warring factions. The resulting conflict would plunge the city into a cycle of bloodshed so savage it would redefine gang warfare in Britain. The genesis of the war was almost laughably petty, a testament to the fragile egos and explosive tempers that govern this world. A dispute over a fake watch, a spilled drink in a nightclub, these were the sparks that ignited the inferno. On one side stood the established A-Team, led by Stephen Britton, clinging to their dominance. On the other was a new, ambitious faction connected to Michael Carroll, a group that would become known simply as the Anti-A-Team. They were the challengers, hungry, ruthless, and unburdened by the old codes. The Anti-A-Team represented a new breed of gangster, one that embraced technology as readily as it embraced violence. They used sophisticated GPS trackers to stalk their enemies and communicated through encrypted phones, making them a disciplined and elusive foe. The streets of Salford became their chessboard, and the pieces were human lives. The violence was audacious and spectacular. Grenades were tossed into homes, smashing the suburban quiet. Drive-by shootings were carried out in broad daylight, the staccato roar of automatic weapons becoming a terrifyingly familiar sound. This was not a hidden war. It was a public spectacle of brutality designed to terrorize rivals and cement control. The conflict soon bled beyond Salford's borders, its tendrils reaching into Liverpool, inevitably ensnaring the man who had made a career of mediating such disputes, John Kinsella. Central to this war was a man who, like Kinsella, was a giant of the underworld, Paul Massie. Dubbed Mr. Big by the press and a man who had once brazenly run for mayor of Salford, Massie was a charismatic and deeply entrenched figure. His influence was legendary, his criminal portfolio extensive. For more than 20 years, he and John Kinsella were not just associates, they were close friends, brothers in a bond, forged in crime and mutual respect. In the Salford War, Massie and Kinsella's allegiance lay with the A-Team. Massie, in particular, was seen as a mentor and father figure to the faction's leader, Stephen Britton. This made him an obstacle, a pillar of the old guard that the ascendant anti-A team needed to demolish. His status as a mediator was now a liability, marking him for death. On the warm summer evening of the 26th of July, 2015, the inevitable happened. As Massie pulled up to the gates of his modest home in the Clifton area, a figure clad in military-style camouflage emerged from the grounds of the church across the street. The assassin raised an Uzi-style submachine gun and unleashed a torrent of gunfire. 18 rounds ripped through the air. Massie, caught completely by surprise, was hit 5 times. He scrambled desperately for cover behind his silver BMW, but his strength failed him. Paul Massie, the infamous Mr. Big of Salford, bled to death on his own doorstep. His execution was a seismic event. It was a declaration by the anti-A team that the old rules were dead. No one, regardless of their status, was safe. At Massie's funeral, a grim-faced John Kinsella stood as a pallbearer carrying the coffin of his murdered friend. As he lowered the casket into the earth, he must have known. The crosshairs had shifted. He was next. For nearly 3 years, John Kinsella lived as a marked man. He moved his family, retreated from the spotlight, and tried to maintain a semblance of normal life. On the morning of Saturday, May 5, 2018, that semblance was shattered forever. The morning was cool and bright. Kinsella, now 53, was out on his daily routine, walking his 6 American bulldogs on a secluded track near his new home in Rain Hill, a quiet town situated between Liverpool and St. Helens. Beside him was his partner, Wendy Owen, who was pregnant with their child. It was a picture of domestic peace, a world away from the brutal realities of his past. But his past was catching up to him, pedaling silently from behind. The figure on the mountain bike looked like any other weekend fitness enthusiast, dressed in cycling gear with a high-visibility jacket. But beneath the innocuous disguise was Mark Fellows, a man known to the underworld by a chillingly apt moniker, the Iceman. He was a contract killer, a cold-blooded professional prized for his emotionless efficiency. As he drew level with the couple, Fellows dismounted. There were no words, no warning. He raised a Webley revolver and fired 2 shots into Kinsella's back. The powerful man crumpled to the ground. Wendy Owen screamed and, in a surge of protective instinct, charged at the gunman. Fellows shoved her aside. He then stood over the fallen Kinsella, a figure of absolute control, and fired 2 more precise shots into the back of his head. It was the signature of a professional. The execution was clean, final, and absolute. As the Iceman turned his weapon on Wendy, she fled, running in a desperate, zigzagging pattern across the open ground to make herself a harder target. Bullets whizzed past her. Her survival was a miracle. Her testimony would be the killer's damnation. The murder of Scouse John was not just another Gangland hit. It was a clinical assassination, a bloody exclamation point in a war that had now claimed 2 of its most iconic figures. For the detectives of Greater Manchester Police, this was the ultimate challenge. They were hunting a ghost, a professional hitman who had now executed 2 of the Northwest's most feared gangsters with military precision, leaving behind almost no forensic evidence. The killer, Mark Fellows, was a phantom who blended into the background. His cover was genius in its simplicity. He was a dedicated long-distance runner and cyclist, and he used his obsessive training regimen as the perfect cover for his deadly reconnaissance. For months leading up to each hit, he would cycle and run the routes around his targets' homes, meticulously logging their movements, mapping escape paths, and becoming a familiar, unremarkable presence. His accomplice, Stephen Boyle, acted as his spotter and getaway driver, another cog in a well-oiled killing machine. They communicated using encrypted PGP phones, devices designed to be impenetrable to law enforcement. They believed they were untouchable. Their downfall came from the killer's own vanity and his love of technology. During a search of Fellows' home, detectives made a discovery that would crack the entire case wide open: a Garmin Forerunner GPS watch. Fellows, the meticulous planner, the cold and calculating Iceman, had obsessively tracked his own movements, logging every run and every ride. He had failed to realize that in tracking his fitness, he was also creating an indelible record of his crime. The data on the watch was a digital confession. It contained a ghost run, a trip Fellows had made months before the Massie murder, where he had traveled to the exact area of the crime scene to scope it out. More damning still, it contained the complete record of the day he killed John Kinsella. It showed his 35-minute cycle from his home in Warrington to the wooded path in Rain Hill. It showed his movements as he lay in wait. And it showed his rapid escape. The detectives had their ghost. The Iceman's digital breadcrumb trail had led them right to his front door. The trial of Mark Fellows and Stephen Boyle, which began in late 2018 at Liverpool Crown Court, was an event of immense legal and public interest. The security was unprecedented, with armed police lining the corridors. Inside the courtroom, the tension was electric. On one side sat the grieving families of Massie and Kinsella. On the other, the two accused men, a study in contrasts. Stephen Boyle was visibly nervous, his facade crumbling under the weight of the evidence. Mark Fellows, however, remained true to his name. He sat impassively in the dock, his face a mask of detached indifference, even as the prosecution, led by Paul Greeny QC, methodically dismantled his life's work. The Garmin watch was the star witness. Prosecutors displayed its data on large screens for the jury to see, overlaying the GPS tracks onto maps of the crime scenes. It was irrefutable, a silent testimony that technology had turned against its master. This data, combined with CCTV footage that captured Fellows on his bike and mobile phone evidence that linked him and Boyle, created an inescapable net. Boyle, in a desperate bid to save himself, turned on his accomplice, claiming he was just a patsy, an unwitting chauffeur who thought they were involved in a simple drug debt collection. He painted Fellows as the sole architect of the murders. The jury was not swayed by his pleas. After an 8-week trial, they delivered their verdict. Mark Fellows was found guilty of the murders of both Paul Massie and John Kinsella. Stephen Boyle was found guilty of the murder of John Kinsella, his role as a spotter crucial to the hit's success. The judge, Mr. Justice William Davis, looked directly at Fellows as he delivered the sentence. He called him a gun for hire, a contract killer, and labeled the murder's executions pure and simple. For his cold and brutal crimes, Mark Fellows was sentenced to a whole life term, destined to die in prison. Boyle received a life sentence with a minimum of 33 years. The Iceman had finally been put on ice. The convictions were a landmark victory for law enforcement, a testament to dogged police work and the unexpected power of a single piece of consumer technology. But no one believed for a moment that this was the end. On the streets of Salford and Liverpool, the war was not over. You can jail the soldiers, but you cannot imprison the hatred and greed that fuel the conflict. The power vacuum left by the deaths of Massie and Kinsella and the imprisonment of their killers was quickly filled by a new generation of players eager to claim their territory. The cycle of violence, revenge, and retaliation is a wheel that never stops turning. The murders of Paul Massie and John Kinsella stand as a brutal monument to a specific moment in the evolution of organized crime. It was a moment where the old world of handshakes and backroom deals collided violently with the new world of encrypted data and GPS tracking. For the families of the victims, the verdicts brought a measure of justice, but not peace. The scars left by such brutality never truly fade. The story of the Iceman and his Garmin watch serves as a chilling cautionary tale for a digital age, that even in a world of secrets and shadows, you can never outrun your own trail. And on the streets of the Northwest, an uneasy peace now holds. But beneath the surface, the embers of old feuds continue to glow, waiting for the right wind to be fanned once more into a raging fire.